Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, March 29th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 155 days, the game against Michigan in 246 days. All right, this is a little unorthodox, but for 2 days in a row on this show, we're going to be talking about rule changes, potential rule changes for college football. Did a whole show yesterday. Now we're going to do another one. This is actually about a rule change in the NFL, but that could be coming to college at some point relatively soon, and it is a very big one. The NFL completely overhauling the kickoff system, going to the XFL model. If it comes to college football in a year, it is going to really dramatically change what that sport looks like. Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com is my guest today. He just had the pleasure of speaking to one of my absolute favorite interview subjects, Bill Carollo of the Big Ten, Big Ten's director of officiating, who is always just a wealth of information. Maybe my favorite hour of the year interview-wise at Big Ten Media Days every year. I'm going to get a little bonus time with Bill Carollo to talk about this rule and a bunch of other stuff. Tony, I guess before we dive into that whole thing, let's talk just about the NFL rule. I'm sure I am probably not the only person who has not been watching every single moment of XFL football over the last year or two. So explain the new kickoff rule in the NFL and what it's going to look like in games this fall.
Yeah, the new NFL kickoff rule, if you haven't seen the XFL and you're one of the many who hasn't, basically you're still kicking off from the same spot, roughly. The kicker kicks off from the 35, but it's where everybody else is that is going to be completely different because the kickoff coverage team is going to be lined up at the opponent's 40 to 45 yard line in this zone, and 5 to 10 yards away from them is where the blocking team will be. And then the one or two returners will be lined up between the 20 yard line and the goal line. And there are no fair catches, and the blockers, nobody can move while the ball is in the air. The only person that can move are the returners and the kicker. And so the coverage team can't move until the ball is caught, and blockers can't move until the ball is caught. So it's meant to cut down on these high impact collisions where guys are running 40 yards downfield and just smashing into each other. Whether or not there's ever a return, there's still a bunch of collisions. So this changes that. And like I said, there are no more fair catches. You can still have touchbacks. But that's really the gist of it. And then it just becomes almost like a running play once the ball is received, because everything is much more compacted and defenders are essentially starting from a standstill. So are the blockers.
All right. So that's the rule that's coming to the NFL. I read a very interesting thread about that and how it changed things in the XFL. And you're looking for a different type of returner, and it's more like running backs than it is just like, who's the fastest dude on your team? Give it to that guy, because you're looking to hit holes rather than it's a whole thing. Guess what? That's an NFL rule this year. Tony, it's not our problem. We don't cover the NFL. I'm not even really interested in the NFL, but that's okay. Because here's the deal. If it's in the NFL this year, it feels like it's probably only a matter of time until it gets to college football, assuming it goes well in the NFL. So you talked to Bill Carollo from the Big Ten, the Big Ten's director of officiating. What did he tell you about, what would that process look like, and when might it happen at the college level? Because it doesn't sound like that's something that's going to happen this year.
Right. And we talked about the idea of kickoffs in general, and it's the most dangerous part of the game. It's where the most injuries occur. We've seen injuries over the years. Marvell Reese was injured on a kickoff return. Other players have been injured on a kickoff return. It's much more prevalent where everybody else is injured rather than the returner is injured. So they've done things in terms of they've changed so many different kinds of blocking on the kickoff return to make things safer, and they have made it safer. But the NFL doing this is a pretty dramatic and perhaps drastic move. But the NFL, as you know, as people watching and listening, and as Bill Carollo said, it's almost become the kickoff has almost become a non-event in the NFL, kind of like the extra point. We saw them move the extra point back a few years ago, and now it's no longer the gimme that it used to be, and it has affected and changed games. And so this is another way to do that, to reincorporate what used to be a very exciting play back into the league, because for forever now, that's just touchback after touchback after touchback. And now with the changing of the kickoff rules back in 2018 for college football, along with all the blockings, there are fewer injuries, but college football will be watching what happens with the NFL this year. And it's not just necessarily about being, oh boy, it was so much more exciting. And I think that would help in terms of being a positive factor for the college football, but it will also come down to, if the injury numbers are down, then that is going to be the biggest factor in this. And if things stay clean, that's going to be a huge factor. So I asked him, how surprised would you be if in 2025 this rule was in college football? And I'll just give you the quote that he gave me was, "The way the temperature in the room is now, I'd be surprised if we made that change. But if the data that the NFL provides after this 1 year, as far as injuries, and injuries would be the leading reason, if they see significant improvement for the game, then I'd say we're going to do it." So college football right now has not been many talks, much conversation about doing it. There's obviously always, talking here and there. It's not really, there's no momentum for it right now because they don't have any data to do it, to implement it, to encourage the change. So the NFL is essentially a pilot program for college football right now regarding the new kickoff rule.
It does feel like that's a little bit backwards. Normally, the rule will get, they'll try it in the XFL, and then if it works there, sure, it moves up the ladder. Instead, it goes from the XFL straight to the NFL, and then might come down to college or high school or whatever. Baseball, Major League Baseball, bought a controlling interest in the Atlantic League, the independent league, several years ago, and they tested all sorts of crazy stuff there, and moving the pitching rubber and bigger bases and all sorts of different rules there, because you try it in sort of a lab setting in a rather low stakes area. And then if it works there, okay, then you move it up. It's interesting that it's sort of working the other way, that, well, if it works in the NFL, maybe we'll see it in the high school level and the college level. That is not the only rule change that is going to be coming this year, and it's not the only potential rule change that the NFL is implementing, that college football is at least looking at. You mentioned before the show the hip drop tackle. That's something the NFL is already taking steps to ban, and it sounds like that could potentially be something that college football, again, might follow the NFL in.
Yeah, and it's obviously nobody that is in charge of officials would want to bring in another call that is almost a judgment call. He said it's a very difficult call to make, the hip drop tackle. They're going to watch it. They're not necessarily, they won't be implementing it this year. But again, it comes down to data. And if there are fewer injuries because of it, then you can just assume that they'll go that way. But they have changed all kinds of different blocking, cut blocking, from this angle, from that angle. It used to be only in this situation. Now they've cut, they continue every year to try to make things a little bit safer by taking things away, but it also makes it a little bit harder for defenders or blockers. And when you're talking about when they got rid of you can't hit quarterbacks low, you can't hit quarterbacks high because of the targeting. Now, if you want to take away the hip and the waist area, defensive coaches and players are like, what are we supposed to do? And refs also are like, I don't know. And Bill Carollo's judgment is basically, these are the rules, teach around the rules. And, if this is what is implemented for the safety of the players, do something to work within the rules. Don't just complain about what is now made more difficult. Yeah, it's more difficult. It's more difficult for everybody, but you're trying to keep knees from being collapsed and things like that. So isn't it in the best interest of everybody if they have this rule? But again, they're going to look at the data that it provides. I would have to assume the data is going to come back like, yeah, there are fewer injuries because there are fewer tackles like this. So it seems like just, what, if you eliminate all tackling, you know what happens then also, Tom? Fewer injuries.
A lot of flag injuries, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just, as you're talking about kickoffs and injuries and this stuff, I'm just thinking back to different guys who were impacted by injury in kickoff at various times. I don't know if Paris Campbell actually got a concussion on kickoff, but I know he stopped returning kickoffs because of the risk of concussion. I remember Lathan Ransom getting pretty seriously hurt on a kickoff. The kickoff return that Britton Covey ran back for a touchdown for Utah in the Rose Bowl a couple of years ago. I think there were 2 different Buckeyes on the ground after that one. So yeah, it is definitely one of the most dangerous plays in football. And it feels like the injury aspect is what's driving a lot of these conversations. You mentioned that in terms of the considerations with the kickoff. You mentioned that in terms of the considerations with the hip drop tackle. There's another rule change coming this year that you talked to Bill about. This is one that I didn't even realize there was an exception for this, but we have seen horse collar tackles get called a bunch over the years. Apparently there was an exception as far as where on the field those could and could not be called that is going away. I thought this was a very interesting change.
Yeah, horse collar tackling was allowed in the pocket, in the box on quarterbacks or perhaps on a draw play where you're collapsing the pocket and the running back, gets the ball late and takes off. And yeah, I didn't realize that was a rule last year either because I complained on Twitter like, hey, you're not going to call the horse collar? And then I got a bunch of, well, actually replies. And it's like, oh, well, thank you for that. The obscure rule that only I didn't know about. So yes, that one is being taken off the books because there were still injuries and they're trying to alleviate that because you've got big defensive linemen grabbing the collar of a quarterback and then falling down on them. And clearly it doesn't lead to something that is safe. And not that you can only make football so safe, and we understand that. But they tried to make an exception because of the difficulty and just the kind of mess that the pocket is. You're just grabbing, things like that. It's not an open field tackle. And so you can only grab the quarterback so many different ways while you're being blocked. So they're trying to make an exception for the defense in that situation, but it was leading to injuries. And so they just decided to get rid of it. And so, yes, no more horse collar. And they've even tried to you can't get the nameplate, they're moving it a little bit further back. And sometimes, this is not a horse collar, but you don't necessarily have to get your fingers in. So it's all very intricate. And, that's, I'm sure, fun for refs. It's like, were the fingers in the collar? I don't know, but it looked like it. And so, yeah, that's just, you know what? Just stay away from the head. Don't touch the hips. Don't touch those knees. And basically thighs and midsection above the waist. That's all. The only thing that's open. And if you go for the chest, don't do it with your helmet or perhaps shoulder either.
Yes, the head, shoulders, knees, and toes song is now defensive lines will need to be singing that to remember all the places that cannot hit the quarterback this year. One other place I'm sure that they will be watching for hits on the heads and shoulders and knees and toes is in the Big Ten Replay Center. There is a change there coming for the Big Ten Conference as well.
Yeah, the Big Ten Replay Center being built right now in Chicago, so all replays will go there. There will still be replay officials in each individual stadium at each individual game, but if it goes through replay, it's going to be handled in Chicago. In fact, they will be doing that, rolling it out this spring. Not that they're going to be having instant replay for all of the spring games, but they're going to be there watching all the spring games. And I think Ohio State's going to be one of the first ones where they're just dry running it, that sort of thing. And Bill said, we're not going to have carpeting yet. It's still, everything's still under construction there, but they want to get a look at how it works. And I did say, how many people do you have in Chicago doing this? Because one of the aspects of doing this, one of the reasons to do it is so that you have consistency on judgment calls. Because from week to week, you can have this week, because we know there's no such thing as targeting is the same every week or whatever. You don't know whether something is necessarily going to be called targeting because it's a bunch of different people doing it. But if it's fewer people doing it, you start to learn their strike zone, basically, I think is how this is going to go. But so I did say, well, how many guys are you going to, it's not just one person because you got many different games going on. And he said, early in the season when you've got 18 teams going and none of those teams are necessarily playing themselves, you could have, 10 to 12, however many replay officials in the hub all at the same time because you've got that many games going on. So it'll be an interesting time where it's kind of like the NHL where Toronto or whatever can buzz in, Chicago can buzz in when they see something. and then talk it out. But they also want to start moving things along, getting them done quicker. Another rule would be like the 2-minute warning. That's not about a commercial. That's just about getting everything like reassessed and giving everybody, the refs and coaches and everybody, just a chance to take a breather in terms of the situation of the game. And so they're just the technology aspect. They want to continue to improve that, including the in-helmet communications to alleviate some of the sign stealing that we've seen from last year.
All right, so there's a little look ahead at some changes coming to college football this year and potentially in 2025 and beyond. We're going to be giving you a little bit of a look ahead at this year's Ohio State football team this weekend. Tony, Kevin, and I will be covering the student appreciation practice on Saturday. To watch the full practice, always lots of stuff to learn there. Pretty big recruiting weekend as well. Should have some recruiting coverage for you coming out of that as well. It's going to be a very busy and an interesting week and weekend at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Hope you will join us there, and hope you'll join us on YouTube at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Lots of interviews, lots of podcasts, lots of everything. We'll probably have some highlights from practice this weekend, all that and more at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.